Tensions in the Middle East have reached a boiling point. As the United States shifts its military assets toward the region, the world holds its breath, awaiting a decision that could shape the future of global geopolitics. At the center of this storm, the U.S. is preparing for potential military action against Iran, a move that could alter the course of history. But the question remains, will President Trump authorize a strike? In the coming days, the U.S. will deploy military forces, air, land, and sea, ready to execute options that could escalate the conflict to unprecedented levels. The U.S. has already moved an aircraft carrier closer to Iran, signaling the seriousness of the situation. But is this just a show of strength, or is it the first step toward war? The clock is ticking, and every action taken now will have a ripple effect, not just for the U.S. and Iran, but for the entire world. Now, let's break down what's happening behind the scenes and explore how we got here. The stakes couldn't be higher. The United States, already with 30,000 troops in the region, is making moves that could lead to a dramatic escalation of its involvement in the Middle East. The deployment of additional military assets, including missile defense systems to protect U.S. bases and Israel, signals a shift towards a more offensive posture. The U.S. military isn't just sending a message, it's preparing for potential combat. But the question remains, how did we arrive at this precipice? For years, tensions between the U.S. and Iran have simmered, from nuclear agreements to military clashes in the region. However, recent actions, such as Iran's increasing military aggressiveness and threats, have pushed the U.S. to consider more direct action. The deployment of aircraft carriers to the region is the clearest sign yet of a shift in strategy. But before we move forward, let's first take a look at the historical context that has led to these critical decisions today. To understand the current crisis, we must look back at the history of U.S.-Iran relations, a complex and volatile narrative that spans decades. It all began in 1979 when the U.S. Embassy in Tehran was seized by Iranian militants, marking the beginning of a bitter, often hostile relationship. Since then, the U.S. has imposed sanctions on Iran, while Tehran has supported militant groups across the Middle East, complicating any diplomatic solutions. In recent years, the nuclear issue has dominated the agenda. The 2015 Iran nuclear deal, hailed as a breakthrough, sought to curb Iran's nuclear ambitions in exchange for sanctions relief. But in 2018, President Trump withdrew the U.S. from the agreement, citing Iran's continued destabilizing actions in the region. Since then, tensions have only escalated, with military confrontations in the Persian Gulf and Iran's increasing defiance. Now, with military assets moving into the region, the stakes have never been higher. Could this be the point of no return? With the historical context in mind, let's examine how the latest escalation unfolded and what it means for the future. Just recently, a new spark ignited tensions. The U.S. announced the movement of its military assets into the Middle East, including aircraft carriers and missile defense systems. This decision comes after a series of provocative actions by Iran, including missile strikes on U.S. allies in the region and escalating military drills. But the real game changer was the U.S. military's confirmation that it was ready to carry out military action if needed. The deployment of military forces into the region is not just a show of force. It's a calculated response to what U.S. officials see as an existential threat posed by Iran's growing military power and influence. These are not idle threats. The Pentagon has made it clear that they are preparing a range of options depending on how Iran reacts in the coming days. The clock is ticking, and the question on everyone's mind is whether President Trump will take the ultimate step. But what is the true nature of the threat? What are the underlying forces that could drive this conflict to the breaking point? At the heart of this crisis lies a deeply complex system of military, political, and economic mechanisms. On the surface, it might seem like a simple matter of U.S. and Iranian hostilities, but the truth is far more intricate. The U.S. is not just responding to Iran's provocations, it is also positioning itself within a broader geopolitical struggle for influence in the Middle East. Iran's role as a regional power, its influence over proxy groups, and its strategic location in the Persian Gulf give it immense leverage, but the U.S. military's presence in the region serves as a counterbalance, ensuring access to vital shipping lanes and maintaining influence over oil-rich nations. The military assets being deployed, including missile defense systems, are not merely defensive, they are a key part of the broader strategy of containment. Behind the scenes, the U.S. is playing a high-stakes game of deterrence, sending a message to both Iran and its allies that any aggressive move will come at a heavy price. It's a delicate balance, one that could tip into open conflict if not handled carefully. But as tensions rise, a second crisis looms. How will this all escalate further in the coming days? The second wave of tension hit when the U.S. made its military posture clear. More than just a defensive strategy, this is an offensive positioning. As U.S. forces close in, both Iran and its regional allies are on edge. The escalation is palpable. Iran has already shown signs of defiance, continuing its missile tests and military drills, flaunting its strength as if to challenge the U.S. presence head-on. With 3 aircraft carriers positioned in distant parts of the world, and additional military resources flowing into the region, this is no longer just a matter of posturing. Military planners in the U.S. are drawing up offensive operations. One source mentioned that the potential strike would be more offensive, a stark contrast to previous more restrained actions. The U.S. is preparing for a decisive moment, but no one knows how Iran will respond. Escalation could spiral out of control rapidly. This is a critical juncture. A miscalculation could lead to war, and the stakes are too high for any side to retreat easily. And as the possibility of military conflict looms, the question is not only how this will affect governments, but how it will impact the lives of ordinary citizens caught in the crossfire. For the people of the Middle East, the threat of war isn't just an abstract political maneuver, it's a daily reality. The looming possibility of a U.S.-Iran military conflict could devastate millions of innocent lives. From the bustling streets of Tehran to the markets in Baghdad, families are left wondering what the future holds. The uncertainty is suffocating as the weight of military movements, airstrikes, and potential invasions takes its toll. In Israel, the threat of missile strikes is constant. The presence of U.S. military forces in the region is intended to provide a shield, but that shield is not infallible. For the people of Israel and its allies, the fear of retaliation from Iran-backed militias is a constant threat. This is not just a battle between governments, this is about real people whose lives will be forever altered by decisions made in faraway halls of power. If you're watching this, you're already part of the conversation. The future of the Middle East is being written right now, and every action we take can make a difference. But the impact of this conflict isn't confined to the region alone. Let's look at the global repercussions that could ripple across the world. The ramifications of a U.S.-Iran military conflict reach far beyond the Middle East. In today's interconnected world, what happens in the Persian Gulf can send shockwaves across the globe. The ripple effects will be felt in every corner of the world, especially in the realm of geopolitics and global markets. For one, global oil prices are likely to skyrocket. Iran controls a significant portion of the world's oil supply routes, and any disruption to this flow could lead to economic instability worldwide. Countries that rely on Iranian oil, such as China and India, could face severe economic consequences, further complicating international relations. On the diplomatic front, a military strike against Iran could fracture alliances. Nations that rely on the U.S. for security, such as Saudi Arabia and Israel, would stand firmly with Washington. However, countries like Russia and China, who have a vested interest in Iran's stability, might openly oppose the U.S. The result, a global chess game where alliances shift and the geopolitical order becomes increasingly unstable. As tensions build, it's time to look forward. What does the future hold for this volatile situation? Let's examine 3 possible outcomes. As we stand on the precipice of potential conflict, it's essential to consider the possible outcomes. The future of this crisis is uncertain, but we can imagine three scenarios, each with its own set of consequences. The optimistic scenario: the tension de-escalates through diplomacy, with Iran agreeing to a new set of negotiations or concessions, and the US pulls back its forces. In this scenario, the region could experience a fragile peace, with economic sanctions softened and military forces withdrawn. While peace would be a welcome relief, the underlying tensions would still remain, and trust between the US and Iran would take years to rebuild. The middle ground scenario: a limited military strike occurs, targeting specific military installations in Iran. This would signal a strong message, but the action wouldn't lead to full-scale war. While the immediate threat would be neutralized, the US and Iran would continue a tense standoff, with periodic flare-ups and escalating proxy conflicts in the region. The worst-case scenario: a full-blown military conflict erupts. This would result in massive casualties on both sides, destabilizing the region for years. The global economy would be hit hard, with oil prices soaring and international trade routes disrupted. Iran's response could involve asymmetric warfare, including attacks on US allies and interests globally. Whatever happens next, the world will be watching closely. Let's bring it all together and consider the big picture. As we conclude, one thing becomes clear: the stakes are higher than ever before. The US and Iran stand at a critical juncture, with the potential for conflict that could reshape the Middle East and the global order. Whether through diplomacy, a limited strike, or an all-out war, the choices made in the coming days will have far-reaching consequences. This is not just a geopolitical issue, it's a matter of human lives, economic stability, and the future of international relations. For those of us watching from the outside, it's easy to feel detached. But the reality is, this is a global issue. The actions taken today will affect us all tomorrow. The US and Iran are not isolated powers. Their actions influence the entire world. The question we all must ask is, what role will we play in shaping the future? Stay informed, stay engaged, and never underestimate the power of your voice in these uncertain times. The future is in our hands.